Torah. I liked his word from the Belzer Rebbe with the Yad. That was very nice.
Yeah, like, why? It's like
But
why? It's, the fingers line up here.
yeah, he can't
You give, you
stop.
have to give each person. Yeah.
He can't stop. He goes on and on and on. He
Like
very
like
rarely
a
gives
terrorist.
like
A
a
terrorist
terrorist.
only learns. They only learn how to take off. They don't learn how to land. No, the hijacker.
Yeah, see, that's a good one. You can use that. A hijacker. Yeah, better word.
Look, it's like very good to go. So Akiva all the time, he takes pride in the fact that he's not a partisan Lubavitcher. He's universal. So Akiva says, "Oh, you said over such beautiful Torah from the masters of Chassidus," and Akiva said that to trigger him, and right away he objected. What do you mean? I spoke out Yaakov Galinsky, and I spoke out some other Elizabeth Shukadel, Zalman Sorotskin. How could you say that I'm only a master of Chassidus? I'm an equal opportunity vendor. So Akiva told me afterwards. I knew that would trigger him. That's why I said it. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Mishnah. Nitma Sholim. So we did the Mishnah yesterday, but we'll review because that's the subject of today's Gemara. Nitma Sholim. Arubai. Most of the carbon Pesach became Tamei, or all of the carbon Pesach became Tamei. Sarfa Noishe Lefnei Abira. You have to burn in the front of the Beis Hamikdash. We already learned yesterday it's to humiliate the person who was negligent with the carbon Pesach and allowed it all to become Tamei. Now, once we schlep him to the Beis Hamikdash to do it, we give him a break. You don't have to bring your wood along. You can use the Atzei HaMaracha, the wood from the Maracha, to burn your nice wood, to burn your tummy wood. Nitma mi'utai. What if only a small portion of the carbon became tummy? Or v'anoisa, or the little bit that got left over from your carbon Pesach. Sarfa noisa b'chasher shem, agagre shem. You allowed to burn it by your own tailgate party. But you have to pay for your own wood. Hatziknin, the Polishers. See, we think the Polishers started in Poland. The Polishers already started in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. Sarfa noisa lefnei abira. They also even burn their they're not the chametz. Even burn their noiser, and they're telling me that they wouldn't have to burn in public and face public humiliation. They'll subject themselves to public humiliation. So they shouldn't have to lay out and pay for the wood. This way, they get the wood for free. My time. The reason why we make someone who was negligent with his carbon Pesach and allowed it all to become Tamei or Roiv is you want to embarrass him, let everybody know this is somebody who was negligent with his carbon Pesach. So you see,
But it's not always negligence.
I guess the Gemara is making an assumption that if it all became Tamei, a small piece you can't hold somebody liable for letting it become Tamei. But the whole carbon Pesach, he should have been very vigilant with it to make sure that it stays tahor. So what's fascinating about
as we all know, stuff happens, right? I don't know the circumstances, but I'm sure there are circumstances where it's not his fault. Why would you want to humiliate him?
I'm sure it's possible to think of a case where something out of his control occurred, definitely. But the assumption is that if the whole thing became Tamei, it's something that would have been easier to avoid. I was once on an airplane, and when it was about
even so, why would you want to humiliate somebody? I mean, it's not bad enough. You're not. That's also a lav. You're not. I mean, to humiliate someone publicly like that in front of the Beis Hamikdash, that's not a very good meetup.
There were times where we'll see other examples where this was done because people have to know that they must be vigilant. It's like if you were a horrible person and you dare travel to visit your children, you're going to be locked up for 14 days.
We just finished learning the whole Gemara about Klal Yisrael being split and not being Mevayish half of Klal Yisrael with the Bitum and Tyre, right? So,
but I guess when it comes to being negligent with coaching, that's something that they decided they have to enforce.
The Gemara says it. What are you going to do?
It was preventative, so that next year this should never happen. People knew about this problem. People knew this was public, and they knew to avoid this so that they shouldn't be put in the same situation. It was very effective.
But all this wouldn't stop somebody who wanted to save a few dollars to not have to use his own wood to burn his nicer. He would be proud. So everybody could say, I wasn't negligent with the carbon Pesach. I just wanted to save a couple of bucks. That's why I came here.
Came back from Algonquin and they were conservation.
Anyway, there are those who say that if somebody's humiliated, they can give good brachas. Maybe
that's true. But we're soon going to see in the Gemara how sensitive Chazal was to be mavaya somebody, and we're going to soon see how they limited the scope of his busha to the minimum that had to be done in order to achieve this objective. So Zok Gemara, my time, we do it to embarrass them. We have to humiliate them, which would be a deterrent. It would make people be vigilant with their karbanos. Zok Gemara weiter. Nitma mi'utay. What if only a small part of the carbon Pesach became tamei? Then you're supposed to burn it with your own wood in your own place. Ramini Fekti Gemara. We learned this brayso. We learned this Mishnah. If someone left Yerushalayim, he's on his way home. And he remembered he had Kodeshim column with him, which he's now taken out of Yerushalayim, which means it was taken michutz, and once it's michutz, it becomes pasul. So now he has pasul akochim, he must burn it. Where must he burn it? Zok Vishta. If he passed Tzofim, and Rashi learns it's a city. Tosha doesn't like learning that it's a city because that's if he left in that direction. What if he left in a different direction? The Tosha learns it means anywhere where you could still see Yerushalayim. Then Sarfai b'mkoimoi, then he could burn it. Once he got that far away, we don't trouble him to come back. He burns it exactly where he discovers it. B'mlav, if he's closer to Yerushalayim, then the halacha is chozer, we turn him around. So we see from here's a Rashi that even if someone doesn't have a whole carbon Pesach, even if he has a little bit of Isser, he also has the right to take the Atzei Maracha to burn it with. So the shaila here is, our Mishnah seems to say that you could only use the Atzei Maracha if you have the entire carbon or arrive the carbon that you must burn. But if you have just a little bit, you're not supposed to use that same meracha. Yet this brayso seems to indicate that even a little bit. It's not fair. But Rashi in Achsanoi, someone who's a guest in Yerushalayim, he lives in Tveria, he doesn't have wood. So since he doesn't have wood, we let him burn, even if it's a little bit. We let him burn it in with the wood of the Beis Hamikdash. And that's what the brayso or the Mishnah that we just quoted is referring to. It's referring to somebody who's a Dachsnoi. He's actually going home now, so he doesn't have a Holzkammer. He doesn't have a warehouse full of wood in Yerushalayim. And our Mishnah that says Dafka, somebody whose entire carbon is Tamei, can use the Holz of the Beis Hamikdash, can use the wood of the Beis Hamikdash. That's referring to a Baal Bayis who lives there. Both cases are speaking with an achsanoi. So before I explain your papa, I just want to point out, Reb Chama Bar Ukva holds that a achsanoi, no matter what his situation is, he's allowed to use the eitim of the Beis Hamikdash. However, Reb Papa is saying no. Even an achsanoi is limited into where he's allowed to use the eitim of the Beis Hamikdash. And he's only allowed to use it if he's on his way. But if he's still parked in Yerushalayim, we would be mechayiv him to continue looking for eitim. But if he left already, Rashi says, if he left already, we slept him back, we're not going to make him start looking for his own wood. He's left already, we force him, we allow him to use the wood of the Beis Hamikdash. But if he's still during his stay in Yerushalayim, we would force him to find his own wood. He'd have to go to a 7-Eleven and buy some wood. This is how Rashi learns the machlokes. So Rashi learns that Rav Chaim Bar Guria is makel held with Achshanoi in all circumstances can use the Atzei Maracha, and Rav Papa holds even in Achshanoi can only use the Atzei Maracha when he's traveling. Rav Zvid Amar la'olam kedamim me'ekar. Rav Zvid wants to side with Rav Chaim Bar Ukva, and he says, like Rav Chaim Bar Ukva said, Chan b'Achshanoi kan b'Bal Habayis. The Avagav lo yichzik there, and Rav Chaim Bar Ukva holds that an Achsanoi has a right to use the wood of the Beis HaMikdash even if he's not traveling. Why? Because Achsanoi, even the Leslie, since he doesn't have a supply of wood, Asu Ketziknin, they treated him like someone who is cheap. It's not that Siknin, Sarf and Oisai, Lefnei Habira, which feel like Hannes Matzah Maracha. You see that Siknin did use the Atzei Maracha, and because of that, he was able to use the Atzei Maracha.
Why are we partial to the chief state today?
Because they're also part of Klai Yisrael. You see from the Mishnah that we worry about Polish also. They also have a place in Klai Yisrael.
So we allow this trait to keep on going. I thought we force them to spend money for. I don't know, they have to spend money.
There's certain things that you have to change someone's nature. And here the Mishnah decided you don't have to change this guy's nature. You got to help him out.
Anyway, how does this work? These are pieces of wood that were already on the maracha. They weren't burnt yet.
No, I think they could even take fresh wood. They could even take fresh
so
firewood.
they were designated. They were designated for the maracha. You mean?
Yes.
They're the pile of wood that they prepared for the maracha.
Correct. And Tosfos at the bottom of the base says there's a T'nai Bezin. Whenever Bezin bought wood from anybody, there was a T'nai built in that people can use it.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it would be Me'ilah.
Right, it's Hegdish.
Maybe the reason why we're worried about the cheap state is because we're afraid that if we're going to force them, which is really what should happen.
They'll do it anyway.
No, not that they can't steal wood, right? But they're not going to do a good job in the Korban Pesach. They're going to get a little bit of wood. They're not going to be sewing it. They're not going to roast it properly. So this way, we're making.
No, we don't allow them to use the Beis HaMikdash's wood to roast the Korban Pesach. We don't allow them to burn it when it has to be destroyed.
Okay, so that idea that
we're afraid they won't destroy it well, and they'll leave raw meat there.
Right, because they're cheap. They're just going to get one little piece of a twig or this or that, and they won't do it well. They'll get wet firewood. This way we're not worried. We want to make sure that it's burnt well, and so therefore these guys are cheap people. We provide them.
Could be. Here. Someone asked how you're allowed to take kachim out of Yerushalayim. The answer is no, and that's why the Mishnah says that if you leave Yerushalayim and you find that you have butcher kachim with you, you have to burn it because you were not allowed to take it out of Yerushalayim. Zakti more weiter. Tanarban. What happens if they wanted to burn this carbon that was all Tomei or was Roiv Tomei, where the Mishnah says you need to burn it in the Beis HaMikdash or in front of the Beis HaMikdash, and he decided that he's going to burn it in his own house, but he wants to use the Atzei Maracha. Ein Shaim Lahem. Of course, you don't allow him to do that. How about Lefnei Habira Umay Atzei Atzman? What if he wants to do Lefnei Habira, but he wants to bring his own wood? I don't want to take from the wood of Hektish. Again, Ein Shaim Lahem, you don't allow it. So, what is the reason for these things? Bishlama me'atzei Amaracha. Bishlama be'atzei Amaracha b'chatzrei Seyain. They can't go take wood from the Beis HaMikdash and burn the Tomei carbon in their own rishos. Ein Shaim Lahem. Dilma Paishin Minayu. He might take extra wood. He might have extra wood remaining after he completes his objective and he burns the carbon. But also and he might use that wood for his own purposes. And then there's a true issue of Me'ilah. So that makes sense why you can't just go to the Beis HaMikdash and stay and take some wood. My time alloy. But if you want to be generous and bring your own wood to burn it, even though you're being embarrassed, but you still don't want to take from Hektish, maybe you should be able to bring your own wood. So Yosef Amar, this is unbelievable. The reason why everybody who comes to get public humiliation we're forcing him to get public humiliation because he was negligent with his carbon. We'll only give him the humiliation that he's supposed to get, that everyone knows that he was negligent with his carbon. But on top of that, someone who doesn't have his own wood should be embarrassed because he sees that other people are bringing their own wood and he can't. That's an extra level of busha that you don't do. You have to be mevayishim. But Chazal is very careful. That doesn't mean you could do whatever you want him. You're only allowed to give him precisely what busha Chazal prescribed for him, but not on thy odor. Not on thy odor.
Yosy,
Yes.
is there also an issue of like a time factor that's supposed to be done as soon as possible or not?
But we're going to actually see when it's done. It actually can't be done right away because you're not allowed to burn it until Chol Hamoed.
Uh-huh.
So it actually sticks around for a little while.
I'm wondering if the point might be a little bit different. The Gedei Levi show, meaning you embarrassed him, but all want him to be embarrassed for one reason and one reason only because you
negligent with the verb.
allowed it to become tummy. But the idea that we should be Leviish because he's poor,
That's
something else.
That's right.
That had nothing to do with this. And because that had nothing to do with this, we're not gonna do that. That's a totally different embarrassment. We're not bringing that in.
It's not that we're metering it. It's a different type of embarrassment. That doesn't count.
Why would you make embarrassment?
So it's interesting to note. It's interesting to note that the Sefer Chassidim brings down that, and this does not apply to me. I must say, this does not apply to me. Rabbi Shelty once said that it says that you're supposed to sing in when a chassan darshans, or when a bar mitzvah darshans, because not everybody can say a drasha. So if everybody says a drasha and we let him say it unhindered, uninterrupted, and he doesn't speak well, he makes a fool out of himself. So this way we interrupt everybody, and this way someone who can't darshan well will end up not being embarrassed. So the halacha is if someone's teaching learning and he says something wrong, you're mechuyev to correct him. You're mechuyev to correct him because you can't leave something wrong go unchecked. But you have to be careful not to embarrass him and to do it in a way where it won't embarrass him. I want to just declare over here it's no holds barred. No, there's nothing to be worried. I'm not embarrassed. I can tell you up front, I don't know the Gemara. So anything you teach me, I welcome. I just look at it like I'm reading it. So this rule doesn't apply over here because I don't get embarrassed. To the contrary, I welcome someone telling me when I'm learning the wrong shot, which I often do. However, the Sefer Chassidim says someone who would get embarrassed, you have to make sure to do it in such a way where it would not embarrass him. I clearly remember it used to be between Mincha and Ma'ariv on Yom Tov, Bochum used to speak in the Agudah. And I remember Bochum was once speaking about Advar Halacha. And I don't remember what it was, but I remember in the middle of Rabbi Lowy corrected him and said, what you're saying is incorrect, it's the wrong halacha. Now, it's so out of character for Rabbi Lowy to do that, but he wasn't allowed to let someone proliferate wrong halachas, and even the way Rabbi Lowy did it was, of course, with the greatest of respect in a way that it shouldn't embarrass him. The Sefer Chassidim, what? What? Oh, so he said, I'm sorry. So he said, so why is it that by Rabbanim you don't have the same rule that you sing in whenever he speaks? It's me, by a Rav, you should also sing in, because what if sometimes a Rav cannot finish, so you should always sing in. It's because someone who's a Rav and he doesn't know what he's talking about deserves to be embarrassed.
Yes, some of us, if we sang it down, don't know how to sing. Make a fool of themselves.
That's right. So the Sefer Chassidim says that's why the Gemara says he uses this to explain the Gemara why it is that we daven Shmoneh Esrei low, because if we daven loud and we were saying vidui for our aveiros, it would be highly embarrassing. So therefore, we make everybody daven Shmoneh Esrei very quietly, so that nobody is going to talk about anything. No one's going to pour that out to Rebbeinu Shalom in a way that people would hear, and therefore it will be embarrassing. What? No, there's tefillos. We say Slach Lanu. We do speak to the Rebbeinu Shalom. We do speak to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And the Meforshim add in and that is also why when someone's davening for the Amud and he Kaddish Kan Iver, he's not davening properly, give him a break. Again, someone who doesn't know how to daven, he can't say Iver, we shouldn't be Mevayishim. Rav Amar, Rav says, Mepnei Achshad. The reason why you're not allowed to bring your own wood is because let's say you bring your own wood to the Beis HaMikdash and you don't use it all up. You successfully burn your carbon and you have leftover wood. What do you do with that leftover wood? You're going to take it home. Now people are going to think that you're stealing wood from the Beis HaMikdash. And that's why everybody uses the wood from the Beis HaMikdash. My benai, what's the difference between these two pshatim? If you brought from home cheaper wood, like twigs or reeds, things that you'd never see by the Atzamurcha, things that Hekdesh do not use. So everyone would know clearly that what you're taking there is not from the Beis HaMikdash. So if you take back your leftovers, no one's going to be choshid you. There's no chshad, but there's still the problem of shaloi levayish, shmisha ein loy, and therefore, if you hold the svars of shaloi levayish, then you wouldn't even be allowed to use kani v'chayusa. But if you held the shalah was only outside chshad, that someone might think you're taking wood from home from the Beis HaMikdash, by kani v'chayusa, you wouldn't have that chshad because everybody knows this does not belong to the Beis HaMikdash. It's not awesome. Rosh Maimid, another example of when they would embarrass somebody. Rosh Maimid, Maimid is a Tmeim al Shar Mizrach. Now there was a Yisrael. They split up all of Klal Yisrael, Kohanim, Levim, and Yisraelim into groups, and every week another group was assigned to run the Beis HaMikdash. So the Kohanim of that Mishmar did the avodah that week, and there was a group of Yisraelim as well whose job was to come to Yerushalayim and to fast and to daven. So that they were administrators of the avodah. So the Maimid would make us follow. Let's say a kohen sees carry a kohen is tomei, and therefore he can't do avodah that day. You don't let him just stay home. He would Maimid as a tmeim al shar mizrach. He would make all of the kohanim that are tomei to stand right by the door to the Ezra's Noshim, right there. My timer, Omer Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef said, "Kedei l'bayishan," to be mevayish them. They knew that this was going to be their day to do the avodah, and they should have made sure that their Torah, they should have kept themselves clean, and they didn't. We're going to embarrass them. Everybody who walks into the Beis HaMikdash knows that here's the wall of shame. Here are the kohanim. They had one day a year where they're going to do avodah, and they weren't careful to stay tahor. Let everybody know about it. It could happen, but I guess there's a lot of things that could happen voluntarily as well. So because of that, we're vayishan. If you ask me, someone could see carried by mistake, and the chami, but vice most of the time when someone sees carried because he had relations and he shouldn't have. Rav Amar mipnei achshad. Rav holds the reason why we make them stand there is because if they don't show up to the Beis HaMikdash, everyone's going to think that they had a job and they didn't want to take off. Since they don't want to take off, that's why they're not here. If you make them stand there, it shows clearly to everybody this fellow didn't do anything wrong. He's not allowed to do the avodah today. You see, he's here. He's not at work anyway. I did. My benayu, ikebenayu mefanki. If it's someone who has a T3, someone who never worked a day in his life, someone who everyone knows doesn't work for a living, if it's al chashad, then he wouldn't have to stand there because everybody knows he might not be the Beis HaMikdash, but there's no way he's working. He never ever worked. Why would he work today? But if it's al to be mevayishim that he wasn't prepared to do the avodah, then you would hold his slot to be there. Inami gadol shishura. He does a job that's a very low skill that does not pay well at all, and we know for sure someone in such a job would for sure not forfeit his Beis HaMikdash service to do such a job. So once again, there's no chashad there, but if it's kedei levaishoy, we would still make him stand there at the entrance to the Beis HaMikdash so everyone sees this fellow wasn't careful. Now, when it comes to chashada is a very interesting thing, how it's applied, because you see a lot of contradictions in how chashada is applied. For instance, we know that the halacha tells us that if you're walking by a shul, b'shasha tzibur mispalin, you mechuyev to go in. So people shouldn't be choshid you that you're not davening. And the Mishnah says that's only if there's no other Beis Medrash in the city, because then somebody would know you might be davening out of Beis Medrash. Or if the Beis Medrash has two doors, but if there's two doors, one on each wall, on opposing walls, then there won't be chashad either, because just because you pass by this door, you might end up going in to the door around the corner. So that's one halacha. There's another halacha that comes to Neres Chanukah, that if you live on the corner and the wall of your home faces two different streets, then you have to put a menorah by both windows because of chashad. So the question is, why over here is there chashad and why here there's not? So there are people who speak about it, but it's a little bit schwerlich to understand exactly how chashad is administered. And he brought down from we have Yoshi's brother-in-law, I forgot his Zilberstein. He brought down from Zilberstein that what happens if you're taking out your mezuzahs to check them. So he says, as chashad, you should leave your mezuzah covers on the doors. Even though you take the mezuzahs out, the covers you should leave on the doors, as chashad. Again, it doesn't clarify anything. He's just telling us a halacha about chashad. But chashad in general is it's difficult to understand when to apply it and when not. Zok the Heilige Mishnah weiter. HaPesach sheyotza, oy shenitno. A Pesach that left where it was supposed to be. So it left its border where it was supposed to be. Oy shenitno or became tameh, yisaref miyad. It must be burnt right away. So once again, this reinforces, if a korban Pesach leaves Yerushalayim, where it's not allowed to be, it becomes possible. Oy shenitno or became tameh, yisaref miyad. How about, so that's the meat that became tameh. How about, now, Yisaref Miyad, Rashi learns, not everybody learns this way, but Rashi learns, is Barba also. This happened still on Erev Pesach. It happened on Erev Pesach. And since it happened on Erev Pesach, you're allowed to still burn it today, because today is still Choil. And Rashi says, you don't have to wait until it becomes Noisar. This is a Psula Guf. The Basar itself is Tameh, and therefore you could burn it right away. If it wasn't a Psula Guf, we're going to soon see in a moment in the Mishnah, but you have to wait till it becomes nicer, which means you'd have to wait one night. Now, you wait one night, tomorrow morning is the first day of Yom Tov. You're not allowed to burn Sulei Kachim on Yom Tov. So you'd have to wait till the first day Chalamoid, which is the 16th day. And there's a Shaila, Rashi says, Adaboiker shall Shisha Asar, till the morning, there's a Shaila if you're allowed to burn Kachim Sulim the night before, Motzei, the first days. Sorry, Debbie?
Yeah, so in the case where it's still Erev Yom Tov and you're supposed to do it miyad, right?
Right.
So wouldn't that be a reason in the case of where we said should use the wood of the person that you should use the Hekash's wood, because then if he doesn't have it with him, he has to go get it, right? And that would take.
Yeah, but if he's not on Har Bayis anymore, he's in
so when it says Shenitma, does it mean he's not on Har Bayis anymore, or is it became Nitma some other way?
Not on Har Bayis. He's back at his camp.
So there's no other way. So there's no other way to become Tameh than where it's still on Har Bayis?
It could have become Tameh on Har Bayis as well. But our Mishnah is discussing when it became Tameh not on Har Bayis, because the question is if you have to go back to Har Bayis to burn it. So clearly you're not located on Har Bayis at the time.
Okay.
If you were on Har Bayis, it probably would make sense just to burn it right there. Why drag back Tameh meat with you?
No, just on the wood itself. I'm saying when we were discussing which wood to use, right? If you would have to.
If you're on Har Bayis anyway, and you wanted to burn it there, you wonder what would be if I was on Har Bayis anyway, and didn't all became Tameh, only a piece of it became Tameh.
Right.
I guess you could be like a polisher, and you could burn it there and use the wood of Har Bayis. You're there anyway.
Okay.
Okay. Zaktin more fighter. Nitmu abaylam. What if the Bailam became Tameh? So this is not a psul in the Gufa carbon. This is just a side technicality that now the carbon doesn't have anybody who could eat it. Oisha Mesa, where the Bailam died. And of course, this means where they all died. So there is no one left to give kashrus to this carbon. This carbon no longer has anybody who can eat it. So then you're not allowed to burn it right away. There to Ubar Tsurasoi, you have to let it become Noisar, and then Yisar Peshishasar. It's actually a child of Tuba Trust. It just means wait till it becomes nicer. Now, those who learn, you actually have to wait till it becomes a little bit spoiled. So this is what we would call not a psolaguf, but it's possible because it has no more eichlin, because all of its eaters died. There, you have to let it become nicer. Even such a psul, you burn right away. Why? Because there's no one to eat it. And Rashi says that becomes a psulaguf. That will become a psulaguf. Bishlama, if the meat became tamei, we know you burn it right away. Why? Because the pasuk says, "V'abasar sheyiga b'chol tamei lo yeyachel be'eshi sarif." So the pasuk says, "Beferish basar kachim that becomes tamei is burned right away." Where do you know that if basar became puzzle because it left the confines of where it's allowed to be? How do you know that that needs to be burnt? This was a very famous story that happened on the first day of the Meluim, where Aaron and his children were doing the Avodah, and there was a carbon that was burnt as if it was puzzle. And Moshe Rabbeinu asked Aaron, "Why did you burn this? This carbon isn't puzzle. The blood wasn't brought inside." And the Gemara elaborates on what this conversation was. Why didn't you eat this carbon chatas? And I believe this was the seer chatas that was brought. I think it was a seer chodesh. Are you going to tell me it became possible because Shabbat nichnas dama lifnim lifnai v'lifnim? Are you going to say it's because the dama this carbon was supposed to be spritzed on the mizbech hachitzon? Are you telling me that by mistake someone took this into the hechel and spritzed the blood, or didn't even spritz it, brought it into the hechel, which would make the dam possible? Omerloi are an answered laugh. That's not what happened. Omerloi Moshe. So maybe maybe it left the azara and then it became possible. Omerloi laugh. No, that's not what happened. It remained inside the azara. There's no psul there either. Omerloi. So if it never left, so there's no psul yoytze. And the dam wasn't brought into the heichal. Well, then why did you not eat? Why did you not eat this carbon? The chatas normally is eaten by kahanim. So if that was Moshe's accusation, mechlal, we can deduce from here the inafka. If in fact the basar was yoytze, inami ayel dama lefnim, or the blood was spritzed, the blood was brought into the heichal, basreifehi, it's a psul that would require that it's burnt right away. Because in fact, Aaron burnt it right away, and these are two suggestions that Moshe said would justify burning it right away. So you have a Rai from here that Yotzei is a psul that would require that the carbon is burnt right away. No. So we're going to get to that. We're going to learn more about this. So I just want to read the pasuk inside. Madula Echad was a chatas b'm koyin lakodesh. He kodesh kodeshami. V'oisa nazon lachem. L'sei says avoyna eid lechaper lechem l'fnei Hashem. Hein lehuva dama lakodesh pnima. So achol toichlu oisa b'kodesh kasher tzivis that it should have done. So the Gemara discusses what the end of this conversation is soon. Zok the Gemara. Bishlama nitma. Bishlama if the basar itself became tummy, Gali Rachmana, the Kadeshim Kalam. The pasuk of V'Basar Sheyiga B'Chal Tamei Lo Ya'achal B'Shisarif is speaking about a carbon shlama. That's Kadeshim Kalam. So the Torah teaches us that Kadeshim Kalam that became tummy you have to burn. Kol Shkein the Kachakachim. Surely Kachakachim, which is more chomer, you'd also have to burn. Eli Yotzei, where did you bring me a raya that Yotzei is tummy and has to be burnt right away? You brought me a raya from a carbon chatos, which is a Kadesh Kachim. Ashkelon Kachakachim. But kachim kalam inolam. How do you know that if a shlamim was yotzei or a carbon pesach was yotzei? How do you know that has to be burned? Besu, I have a long list of items that are kachim kalam that I also need a makar for. The Tanya lon dama, if the blood of a carbon, which has to be spritzed the very day that you're makrivit, it cannot be spritzed the next day, cannot be spritzed at night. So if lon dama, if the dam was not spritzed by nightfall, or nishbach dama, or the blood was spilled out, so it will never be spritzed again, or yotza dama chutz l'kloim, or if the dam, no matter if it's a kadeshim kalam or kachakachim, the dam should never leave the azara, and the dam left azara. The kaimelon b'shreita, We know in all of Shas that the halacha with such a carbon is it has to be burnt right away. Minolog. How do you know those have to be burnt? You won't be able to learn that from the story with the discussion between Aaron and Moshe. So we still are lacking, we're still missing some raya that will know that all of these psulim and Kadeshim Kalam as well, you burn them if that happens. So we can learn it from Rab Shimon's halacha. So let's see what the pasuk says. It doesn't quite say those words exactly as the Gemara quotes them. So now we know we're speaking about a chatas. So it says b'kodesh b'eish tisarif. So those are the words that the Gemara that the Shimon is focusing on. Lima teaches us al chatas on the carbon chatas, which is what that pasuk is talking about. Sheshreifasa b'kodesh. You have to burn it in Nazar if it became possible. Ainly elazul I only know that a chatas whose dam was brought into the heichal, I only know that requires sreifa. Shar psulei kadosh yikachim. All the other psulim that we discussed, mishpach dama, lon dama, yotza dama, and all the other psulim, and emurei kadoshim kalim inayin. And how do you know that the emurim kadoshim kalim that were yotze? How do we know that they have to be burned? Tamalim b'vechol b'kodesh b'eisisar, from the vechol were marbe extra things. In fact, the Gemara ashkechan kachim. The v'chol is one riboy; it'll include kachim. But back to our original question, kadoshim kalim inolan. How do you see from this pasuk to also include Kadeshim Kalam? Ella kol psulei b'kodesh b'shreifa loishna Kadeshim Kalam loishna Kadeshim Kachim. This rule that all of these psulim that if it's a psula guf, it has to be burned, no matter if it's Kadeshim Kachim or Kadeshim Kalam, is Gemara Gemira law. It's a halacha l'Moshe Messinai. So if it's halacha l'Moshe Messinai, what about the story of Aaron where we had a raya that if the dam was brought into the heichal, it would be possible. Why does the pasuk tell us that? It was just saying over a story, but that's not the makar of the chi of sreifa. The makar of the chi of sreifa in all these areas is the halacha l'Moshe Mashiach. Zok to Gemara. What about?
I'll tell you one thing. Hold on. Didn't Moshe end up agreeing with Aaron, conceding that Aaron was correct?
In burning it. Yes, and we're going to get to the end of the story shortly.
Oh, okay, because it seems that Moshe himself didn't know halacha Moshe Sinai.
I'm sorry?
If it seems from the context that Moshe Rabbeinu himself didn't know halacha Moshe Sinai, Aaron had it correct.
No, that's not what happened. He knew that if this occurred, it would require shreifa. And he asked Aaron, did this occur? And that's why you burned it? And Aaron said, no. So we don't know yet what was Aaron's response, why in fact he burnt it. Everybody agrees that if this occurred because of the halacha of Moshe Sinai, it would have to be burned. Aaron was saying that's not what happened.
So Moshe didn't have the whole story correct. That's where you're saying.
He was in the middle of probing. He's in the middle of a conversation with Aaron. We didn't get to Aaron's response yet, which will in fact identify the reason why Aaron felt that the carbon should be burned.
Okay.
What Moshe Rabbeinu kept suspecting, but if you think the halach Moshe is what Aaron answered, that's not the halach Moshe.
That's right. We didn't get Aaron's answer yet. Right. Yeah. No, I think that's clear now. Lotana the Rabbi Baravua. To Amar Afilu Pigel Tony Ritzura. We learned a couple of blot ago that Rabbi Baravua held no matter what the psul was, even if it was a psul aguf, you never burn the carbon right away. You always have to allow it to have Ibertura. And Minola, and where does he know that from? And we learned this as well a couple of days ago. Yalef oven minoiser. Because it says the word oven by Pigel, it says the word oven by Noisar. And we learn, just like Noisar is Noisar, so too every other psul also has to be Noisar before you could burn it. Correct Gemara, why did Rabbi Baravua learn oven from Noisar? He could have learned oven from Chatos to Aaron. And if he learned it from Chatos to Aaron, then he would have learned that you do make Shreifa right away, and you don't need Iber Tzura. Because by the story of Aaron, it also says oven. Amalach, Chatais to iron, Ki Hagavna, Nabi Iber Tsura Ledoirais Boy. Even the Chatas of iron, the Sirius Chodesh, if in fact this psul occurred, it would have also required an Iber Tsura, consistent with what Rabbi Barvua says we learn from Neitzer. But Hasam, that occurred at the time of the inauguration of the Mishkan, Hayra Shas Haisa. It was a special Hayra just at that time, and that's not something that would typically be repeated again. Zok to Gemara. Hashid Amin called Psuli the Kodesh, Bisreifa. Now that we said any Psul of Kodesh is Bisreifa, Loish the Kachakachim, Loish the Kachim Kalim, Gemara Gemirla, we learned that all of these halachas we know from one big halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So the pasuk that we originally used to teach us that if the dam of achatas is brought into the azara, is brought into the heichal, it has to be burned. Kodesh basis arf lamali, right? We were first relying on this pasuk up here, but now that we learn everything out of the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, what do we learn out of this pasuk? Dr. Gemara, ahul legufei yitzrach. You actually need that for itself. Why? So Gadad Chamina, I would have thought, Kol Psul de Kodesh, Kol Lon Dama, Nishbach Dama, Yotza Dama, Nishchata Balayla, the Bisreifa. Oh, so I'm sorry. So let's look at that pasuk. What it's talking about. Again, that's discussing the psul of the dam being brought into the azar. So I would have thought that all of these other cases, the Besreifa, the less no b'chulin, because they're not b'chulin. Oh, I'm sorry. Basar Shayiga we're asking. So I mixed up the psukim. We're not yet focusing on this pasuk of the Chalchatos. We're still focusing on the pasuk from Amar Aleph, which is by a Shlomim that talks about the Basar Shayiga b'chal tomei ve'ishisar. So the question is, if we know everything from Allah Moshe Sinai, what about the pasuk by Shlomim that says if Basar became Tameh, it has to be burned? Dr. Gemara, I needed to tell you that Basar Tameh gets burned because that might not have been included in the Halacha Moshe Sinai. All the other psulim, they're less nubechulim. They don't apply to chulin. None of these psulim can happen by chulin. Chulin doesn't need any of these things. Aval nitna, but Tumah, the chulin nami mifsal. Tumah is a problem by chulin as well. Tumah is something that applies to chulin as well. Ema, since this carbon had something that's a choil zach, maybe now it's no longer on the same level of kedusha as a carbon, and therefore it should no longer require shreifa. The tiskele b'kfura, it should be enough that you could just bury it. Kamash malon this pasuk, because we would not know from the halacha l'moshe. It's a little bit schwer to me how to understand it. It seems like it wouldn't be clear to us that the halacha l'Moshe Sinai included this as well, and therefore we need a pasuk for it. So it seems like it wasn't even clear what the halacha l'Moshe Sinai was, and we need a pasuk to tell me something that I might not have known from the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, or maybe itak is not included in the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and therefore you have a pasuk for it. So let's see what this ma'aseh choil business is. Rashi's ma'aseh choil shlon yishara v'nitma. Since you weren't careful with this carbon and became tamei, nischalala v'huzla b'kedushasa. So now it's no longer as holy as a carbon that had a different type of psul, because it had a psul that even applies to chulin. So you might think, since it's not kachim anymore, it was yanked down, its rank dropped. You might think that it's not covered by the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, or maybe in fact it's not covered by the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That's why there's a pasuk to tell us that a carbon that became tamei, you also have to burn it. Nikma bailam oisha mesu to ubar tzurasu. What happens if the bailam became tamei? So we just discussed that if it's a psul hagof, you burn it. But if it's not a psul hagof, it's just that there's no more bailam, it's tuber tzurasan. But if I'm not mistaken, if Yechim Membraikin, the Mishnah says even that you have to burn right away. So let's analyze this machlokes. I'm Rabbi Yosef. Machlokes shenitnu bailam b'achar zrika. When would the Tanakama hold that it's to uber tzurasan is only if it became tamei after the zrika. His chazi basar lachila, because at that point the zrika stam worked. It was matir the basar lachila, so it's already almost done already. So therefore you need to uber tzurasan. Avonitmu bailam lefnei zrika, the lo is chazi basar lachila. But if the bailam became tamei before the zrika, which is like in the middle of the processing, we weren't even matir yet the basar lachila, Divrakol Yusarif Miyad, that the Nakama would be agreeable to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika that this gets burnt right away. That's a bad psul. It became Tamei, the Bailam became Tamei, and we knew this Pesach would never be eaten even before this Rika. Meisei, Zaklau, Kosher Psul Begufa Yisarif Miyad. If the psul is a psul guf in the carbon itself, you burn it right away. But the dam uva bailam, if there's a problem with the dam or with the bailam, there you have to wait till it becomes nicer and then v'yetz lavechas reika. So let's think. Katani bailam dumi the dam. The two examples of things that you need uber tzura are dam and bailam. They must be similar. Ma dam lefnei zrika. A problem with the dam could only be before the zrika, because after the zrika you can't have a problem with the dam. You don't need the dam anymore. So the problem with the dam must be speaking about a problem before the zrika. So our bailam lefnei zrika. So it makes sense to say that the psul that the Brisa says is the uber tzurasoi by bailam must be lefnei zrika. So you have a raya from this Brisa beferish that there's at least one Tana who holds that if the bailam became tamei lefnei zrika, it would be to uber tzurasim. So therefore, you would have to say that's the Tana of our Mishnah, and they hold that if this happened before this rika, it would still be to uber tzurasim. This is what you'll have to say. Even if the bailam became tamei before this rika, there's still a machloikis where you can't eat the meat at all. You never were able to eat the meat because the bailam became tamei before this rika. The havalik absula begufay, and it's like absula guf. There's a machloikis where the Tanakama holds you still need Ibra Tzura, and there Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika holds that you burn it right away. But if the bailam became tamei after this rika, where the basar was already mutar lachila, is chazer basar lachila, divrei akol psulim machlos of acher ubayu b'tzura. Even Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in our Mishnah would agree there that you need Ibra Tzura. Rabbi Yochanan Amar af la'acher rika nami machloikis. Rabbi Yochanan holds they argue side before the rika, side after this rika. The Tanakama holds you always need Ibra Tzura. Rabbi Yochanan holds you always need Shreifa. And tomorrow we're going to discuss where Rabbi Yochanan got it from, that even after the basar was mutter, why over there you still say you get Shreifa right away and you don't need Ibra Tzura. I guess we could stop over here.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Sure.